Good Thursday morning, and thanks for joining us here on Kare 11 News Now. I'm Alicia Lewis. Happening right now, tensions are high across Minnesota and the country after an ICE agent shot and killed a woman in South Minneapolis. New this morning, hundreds of people showing up protesting the violence at the Whipple building where ICE agents work out of here in the Twin Cities. Now, we did capture people blocking vehicles from entering the building and a few pushing and shoving matches between protesters and ICE agents. A memorial for that woman, Renee Good, has slowly been growing over the last 24 hours. Here's a look at what got us here. ICE officials say agents were conducting targeted operations when they claim that Good tried to ram agents with her car near 33rd Street and Portland Avenue. Minneapolis police say they responded to gunshots at around 9:30. Neighbors reported hearing 2 to 3 gunshots as the SUV sped off before hitting another car and a pole. In the next hour, crowds started gathering at that scene, which is where they've been all night long. Now, the deadly shooting here also sparking protests across cities across the country, from New Orleans to New York to Phoenix and Spokane, Washington. Hundreds of thousands getting out to demonstrate, including state officials. Now, Minneapolis, the public schools are closed the rest of the week because of what they're calling safety concerns. Right now, Governor Tim Walz has the National Guard on standby should they need to respond. Now, we're getting 2 very different perspectives on exactly what happened during the shooting. The Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem traveled back to Minneapolis last night to address the shooting.
This appears as an attempt to kill or to cause bodily harm to agents, an act of domestic terrorism. The ICE officer, fearing for his life and the other officers around him and the safety of the public, fired defensive shots.
Now, that's a very different take from what Governor Walz says happened. Walz blaming the Trump administration's surge of ICE agents for creating conditions that led to the deadly shooting, adding this was predictable and preventable.
Apparently, from the federal government, from the Homeland Security Director herself, has already determined who this person was, what their motive was, and they hadn't even been taken out of the vehicle. We're not living in a normal world.
At the heart of the investigation will be video of the shooting, which has surfaced from multiple different angles. So take a look at your screen. You've likely seen it, but here it is again. In this angle, you can see ICE agents approach Renee Good's vehicle. They repeatedly tell her to get out of her car, and they pull on her car door's handle. She backs up and then starts to drive forward when an officer then fires his weapon. So here's a slow-mo version of that same exact video. You see one officer tugging on the car door, and then another one standing near the front left bumper of the car, drawing his weapon and firing 3 gunshots. As we mentioned earlier, DHS referred to these as defensive shots, but there's debate this morning on whether the officer was reasonable in fearing for his life. We talked to a few use of force experts. Here's what they had to say.
Based on what information I have, which is the same information everybody has, at least initially, I believe that the officer may have a reasonable justification for firing his weapon.
It was an improper use of deadly force. Police officers are trained that you do not shoot at moving vehicles unless the vehicle is being used as a weapon. In this situation, it wasn't. It was somebody that was just failing to stop.
A reasonable officer would have moved to the side of the vehicle immediately and not been standing in front of the vehicle. Certainly, if there was enough time for the officer to draw and fire their handgun, there was enough time for the officer to move out of the way.
Now, one thing they can all agree on is that it's too early in the investigation to have all the facts and make a conclusive judgment. They say we're going to have to wait until investigators gather more video from every angle, interview the officers involved, and interview multiple witnesses. This morning, we're also learning new details about the woman that was killed in the fatal shooting, 37-year-old Renee Good. Her family tells us she leaves behind a daughter. Our investigative team found that she was originally from Colorado Springs. Good graduated from Old Dominion University in Virginia in 2020, where she won a poetry prize for undergrads. She also lived in Kansas City, Missouri, where a former neighbor described what kind of person she was.
A neighbor who, is not a terrorist, not an extremist. That was just a mom who loved her kids, loved her spouse.
Last night, people gathered near the scene of the shooting to remember Renee Good and call for justice. Our Raya Katene was there and has a closer look at what people are saying.
Who's street? Who's street? A member of our community was killed in this very spot, protecting her neighbors.
A growing crowd
Renee Good!
is responsible for this growing memorial as day turns to night on Portland Avenue in Minneapolis and people gather to remember 37-year-old Renee Good.
This is thousands of people. It's just remarkable.
Reverend Sarah Campbell says leaders of all faiths are here to stand in solidarity with their neighbors.
My daughter lives just on the corner there, and she was in the neighborhood and saw the shooting.
It could have been any of us.
As ICE raids continue, organizers with the Minnesota Immigrant Rights Action Committee and Twin Cities Coalition for Justice say Renee's death will only empower them to keep fighting. They're demanding that the federal agent responsible for her death be held accountable and prosecuted while calling on ICE to leave Minnesota.
Our community needs us more than ever right now. That's right. Every single one of us.
I'm beyond the thoughts and prayers. I'm enraged now.
A rage and sadness shared by parents who brought their children, neighbors who are with their friends, and people showing up on their own.
You come out here, you speak up.
But still showing up.
You say something.
It's indescribable how sad and how horrific this act of violence is.
It's hard to know exactly what comes next, but as they hold each other, people in this growing crowd say they'll hold on to Renee's memory as they continue showing up.
Her name was Renee. Her name was Renee. Her name.
And still so many questions to answer about what happened. Kare 11, of course, will have continuing coverage as we're learning more on air, online, and right here on Kare 11 Plus. And just in this morning, new video showing an apparent ICE incident that happened at Roosevelt High School in Minneapolis on Wednesday. So this video is from Evan Johnson. It shows several law enforcement vehicles just outside of Roosevelt High School. We're told this was happening around dismissal yesterday. You can see a really large crowd gathering near one of the doors. Then there's some sort of scuffle and some people end up on the ground there. Now, according to NPR News, Border Patrol officers were at the school around dismissal, handcuffed 2 school staff members, and released chemical irritants on bystanders. The man who shot this video says everything happened incredibly fast.
Agents started materializing and rushing to these little skirmishes all over, and they just started coming out of the vehicles, I guess. I saw in the video that one gentleman with the dreadlocks who was arrested. There was just kind of a little scuffle over by the school, and then all of a sudden it looked like, a dozen or more, maybe 24 agents came running up.
Of course, we'll have more on that throughout the day. Meanwhile, another major story unfolding in our nation's capital, where a hearing over the widespread fraud crisis in our state's social service programs has ended. It didn't take long, too, for tensions to flare up, with lawmakers accusing one another of going, quote, off the rails. At some point, lawmakers even began shouting over one another. Take a listen.
Gentlemen, we'll stop talking on my time. I have to.
Partisan politics and grandstanding were on full display from both sides of the aisle. Questions were raised about how the crisis got to this point, as well as Governor Tim Walz and his administration's oversight.
It needs to be said that Governor Walz needs to step down. Him saying he will stay on to investigate is like O.J. Simpson saying he will investigate the murder of his ex-wife.
How many low-income seniors, people with disabilities, or those with mental illnesses were denied access to housing because fraudsters drained resources and pocketed the money for themselves? The breadth and depth of this fraud is breathtaking, and I fear that this is just the tip of the iceberg.
While Republicans accuse Governor Walz of being complicit or unresponsive, Democrats labeled it a political exercise that ignores President Donald Trump's pardons of convicted fraudsters. Governor Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison have been asked to testify on February 10th. For Kare 11's extensive fraud coverage, you can find it right now at kare11.com/fraud. New this morning, the U.S. could be dealing with the situation in Venezuela for an extensive period of time. According to the New York Times, President Trump told the reporters only time will tell when asked how long the U.S. would be overseeing the nation. When a reporter asked if it could take a year or longer, the president replied, "I would say much longer." During that sit-down with Times reporters, Trump said that the rebuilding process in Venezuela will be profitable and include the taking of oil. The Minnesota State Patrol says it had identified several ways to strengthen security at Minnesota's state capitol over in St. Paul. In an assessment released this week, the agency says the state capitol should standardize credentials, enhance security measures at staff entrances, and improve exterior security with extra lighting, barriers, and cameras. The report also emphasizes the importance of coordinating a singular emergency action plan for all buildings in the Capitol complex. This morning, we're still waiting to hear the details of the contract for Anoka Hennepin teachers, which narrowly avoided a strike set to start today. The agreement came after a 20-hour mediation session. Union leaders must now approve the updated contract before it moves to the school board for final approval. Well, be sure to stick with us. More news and weather. That's all coming up after the break.